So, what's left? We have to look at, well, two more questions. And why do it, and how does this look politically? And what can utilitarianism say politically? Well, if we look back at some of the moral theories that we've studied so far, we find in Aristotle the reason we do the right thing, the reason we develop virtues, the reason we perform virtuous actions is to attain happiness. In a lot of the same way, Mill is claiming that we develop moral virtue in order to develop happiness and avoid a lot of the bad outcomes that come along with our actions. So you're right to be thinking this is very similar to Aristotelian ethics. It's also Aristotelian ethics were also teleological. But if we look back to Kant, it becomes a little bit more clear as to what kinds of questions Mill is asking with regard to the ultimate sanction to this principle of utility, right? Why do it? Why not just calculate the greatest good for me? Why calculate the greatest good for the greatest number? Well, why perform a duty in a Kantian sense? In Kant's terms, if we recall, a duty was something revealed to us by reason. Right? Reason and the will ought act together to inform us as to and get us to perform our duties. Right? If we don't, if I lie, if I commit suicide, if I fail to develop my talents, and if I say, screw you others, I'm not helping you. Right? In all three cases, we find to some extent or another, we're acting irrationally. Likewise, we find in Mill that we are going to have some sort of reason to calculate the greatest good for the greatest number, and we've already seen inklings of it. If we care for only ourselves, we don't get as much out of life. Right? What's more, what Mill wants to do is introduce two types of sanctions: internal and external sanctions. External sanctions are those external reasons coming from outside of us for why we would perform a moral action by his estimation, calculate the greatest good for the greatest number in terms of its the outcomes and its maximization of pleasure and minimization of pain. So in a nutshell, that's utilitarianism. External sanctions are basically we do the right thing because we don't want to upset or, in general, excuse the term, but piss anybody off. He claims on your page 28, right? In the present case, this amounts to the hope and favor and fear of displeasure from our fellow creatures or from God, the ruler of the universe, along with whatever we may have sympathy or affection from them, or love and awe of God, Him, big H, inclining to do His will independently of selfish consequences. So, right, external reasons, well, we want to get along with other people and we don't want to piss them off, and basically we want to get along with God and not piss God off, right? So those are the external reasons for why we should calculate the greatest good for the greatest number. And this makes a certain kind of sense. If you saw me calculating the greatest good for me rather than the greatest good for the greatest number, you'd say, what a jerk, right? And, well, you would probably do nasty things to me, and if I did that, I'd probably be doing nasty things to you. So, you could say I'm morally incorrect. Right? So, internal sanctions, on the other hand, are internal reasons that come from the inside of us. And you find in the passage on your page 29 that this amounts to the conscientious feelings of mankind. So it's our conscience. Now, when I first read this always seemed a little bit mamby-pamby to me. The reason why we do the right thing is our conscience, just because we'll feel bad if we don't. But Mill actually has a fairly sophisticated and similar to Aristotle argument for this. Right? Now, conscience for Mill develops in a lot of the same ways that moral virtue does for Aristotle. It's not something that's in us naturally, but it develops naturally within cultures, within individuals within cultures, over the course of time. Right? And it does this without any encouragement whatsoever. Like I say, Mill wants to argue that most of the reason why we do the right thing, calculating the greatest good for the greatest number, is because of these external sanctions. Right? We don't want to upset people, and we want to get in good with people. But these internal sanctions, this conscience that develops within us, can be a handy tool. Right? And he points out that if we devote a significant portion of our educational system to training people to feel conscientiously about doing the greatest, the thing that will turn out to produce the greatest good for the greatest number, then more or less what we will have is a weighty moral system. On page 30, Mill claims that belief in God has, with reasonable success, operated in terms of a subjective feeling. Many, almost all in Mill's time, ascribe the value of objective and universal truth to God and the dictates of his morality. Right? Now, ultimately, what Mill claims is the force comes from external sanctions on page 30, but nonetheless, right? Nonetheless, what Mill wants to argue is that we can further develop these conscientious feelings in order to produce a more well-rounded social order, right, in terms of this principle of utility. Right? And what we should also note is that in willing our own happiness, right, when we will our own happiness, we can't not help but will that other people participate in our happiness. When I picture my happiness, I picture my girlfriend there, I picture my coworkers there, I picture my colleagues there, I picture my friends there, I picture my family there, right? And they all participate in bringing about my happiness. Is there then some logical requirement that in willing my own happiness, in willing my own happiness, I will that other people participate in it, is there not a logical requirement for me to participate in bringing about the happiness of others? It seems so. Now, turning to On Liberty. What Mill is worried about in this book is something that Thomas Jefferson was worried about in his politics as well. It's called tyranny of the majority. Right? Now, what Mill wants to point out is that even if we did a mass election where everybody gets a vote, right, well, what we would find is that it's not necessarily the greatest number it's not necessarily everybody that gets calculated into a determination of what is best to be done. Right? Now, if we take the example of left-handed people versus right-handed people, let's say that there was a secret ballot vote all over North America, and people were voting whether to deprive all left-handed people of all of their property, right, and disperse it amongst right-handed people, right? What do you think on secret ballot the result of such a vote might be? Well, all the right-handed people would say, yes, please. And all the left-handed people, 1 in 9, right, would say, no, thank you. Right? So, the right-handed people, in a sense, would be tyrannizing over the left-handed people. Right? So, right, what Mill wants to do is establish a moral line in the sand between the powers of the collective over individuals, right? And we'll see that in his On Liberty.